I noticed when Martin was talking about people looking panicked about implementing the EN, he looked straight at me. So I think just at risk of labouring a point, we've gone over a lot of stuff today. It's been quite comprehensive, but I think it's worth just quickly touching ourselves, recapping on what the main points and the main reasons we're here today. We have a directive. Compliance date is the 18th of April 2019, basically 12 months. Member states shall receive and process electronic invoices which comply with the European standard. We have a set of obligations or requirements that are falling out of that directive. I think we've spoke about them enough today. It applies to all public bodies. There is some exemptions there, particularly in relation to defence-related contracts, but there's no requirement for suppliers to submit e-invoices. We have a standard, and Martin's gone into quite a lot of detail about what's in that. But it sums up the broad business terms that make up an invoice and address the common and most common, I suppose, business processes for an invoice. But we also have an opportunity, and we've also heard about the benefits beyond compliance, let's say, that are possible with the right, I suppose, approach to it, the right support for it across the environment, reduced administration, digital agenda, all those areas. So it is a huge opportunity, and I think it's worth us giving it the attention it deserves. But what we've also known now from today, I think, is that e-invoicing, and there's many organizations already reaping the benefits of e-invoicing in all its many different forms. So from organizations supporting suppliers that are sending in scanned copies of their invoices via email, to supporting suppliers who send more structured data that is exported straight out of their accounts packages as is. And then we have national standards and legislation in place across Europe, which are all, if they're working, it's great, and they can all exist and continue to exist in addition to the European standard. But again, I suppose the directive is saying to us, it's trying to put a little bit of interoperability and governance around all this space and say, listen, is there a way we can move forward in a more consistent and coherent way? And so that's why the obligation is on supporting this particular standard. So in response to the directive, I think the first thing that was done was a study was commissioned to have a look at invoice processing in general across the Irish public sector, and what was its state of readiness, if you like, for adopting e-invoicing. That study found that there's in excess, and I think it's well in excess of 4 million. So this study was done back in 2015. It didn't quite cover the entire set of data from the public sector. So I think we're talking a good, significant bit beyond 4 million, but it came to a figure of over 4 million invoices processed across the public sector in 1 year. The volumes are pretty much evenly spread across the sectors, with health, I suppose, having the highest volume of all the sectors, but there's not much between the various sectors. But of that figure, 90% of those invoices are received and processed as paper invoices. So it does put a large administrative burden on the invoice processing functions to deal with those volumes. And I suspect invoice volumes have only gone in one direction, upwards, whereas resourcing to service those invoices probably has stayed stagnant at best. So it is a challenge, but on the positive side, there's a number of shared service initiatives across the public sector. And their attempts, I suppose, to put some standardization around the systems and processes of invoice processing in the public sector. So we certainly have health business services in the health sector. There's the ETB shared service in the education sector, and there's the FMSS project covering central government. All really, really positive steps that I think will position the public sector in a much better way to process invoices in general, but I think also to facilitate new developments and reform around e-invoicing. So in trying to devise a strategy or a national approach, some of the factors we considered, I suppose, in that was, one, the key element of the directive is really trying to bring interoperability both at a cross-border but also at a national level to invoice processing. It's an attempt, I suppose, to protect and leverage investments that either suppliers or public bodies make in e-invoicing, so that they can make the most of that investment with the broadest of audience or communities possible. We have to be conscious of shared services. They're a fundamental part of the invoice processing landscape in the Irish public sector, and the e-invoicing really needs to align itself with the requirements of those shared services. We're conscious that there's quite a bit of diversity across the sectors, let alone in shared services itself. They're at different stages of implementation. There's different scopes in terms of their coverage and rollout, and different systems in place and different levels of functionality. Local government is another consideration. While it doesn't necessarily have a shared services model, it does have quite a good, let's say, coordinated approach to its invoice processing, and it's certainly a very standardized systems and processes approach in that sector. Then, of course, there's public bodies that lie outside of the shared services model or the standardization approach. And they also need to comply with the directive. So what solutions are going to work for them? What approach is going to work for them? There are public bodies who've already made investments in e-invoicing, and we're conscious we want to try and leverage them and protect them going forward. Also a major consideration is to avoid a cost burden, both on public bodies, but especially on suppliers and SMEs. And that's called out, I suppose, even at a directive level, that's a consideration that needs to be taken on board. In terms of sustaining e-invoicing as an implementation model in the public sector and in Ireland in general, it's critical that we have a market of service providers. And so it's important that whatever approach we take, it facilitates a competitive market of service providers, because they're actually the key to delivering e-invoicing. And then it's important we align with government strategies, certainly around digital government and e-government, and initiatives like Build to Share. And these are all very much aligned with e-invoicing, I think, and the approach we've been taking. So to help us in that regard, we have been guided by a number of, let's say, sources or partners in this regard. So we have been guided and governed by a steering committee for e-invoicing, which is made up of representatives from the shared services in health, central government, education, local government, and we also have some special interest parties, if you like, in the steering committee from OGCIO, and OGP are represented in terms of policy, and we're working closely with OGP, the sourcing, I think Spot Buying are here today, to help us develop our approach to procuring e-invoicing solutions as we go forward. So in addition to that steering and governance structure, we've also gone to great lengths to work with other members of the EU and participated in forums to try and understand what other countries are doing, learn from their experiences. We've worked with the government to get the support. A memo for government went last September, and we're doing quite a lot of consultation with suppliers in terms of meeting with SME representative bodies, with the market of service providers. We published a request for information and got some very good information back from the market about what their view of the landscape is, potential solutions, and the challenges that face the public sector. So this slide is an attempt to, I suppose, sum up in a very simplified way the key elements of the national approach. The emphasis is very much on shared services and, if you like, what we're calling sector leads. So the likes of the LGMA in the local government sector is a body we can work with and help us to work out a solution that will have the broadest reach within the sector. Now, in addition to that, I suppose we're conscious there are other bodies outside of the shared services, as I've said. So a deliverable of the programme is to establish a set of commercially available solutions that all public bodies can access to achieve compliance. So a number of those solutions on the framework we expect to be very much aligned with the shared services models, but we also expect the framework to deliver something for public bodies who are outside of the shared services model. Maybe it might be at this point in time, they might be on transition over a number of months, years, or that may not necessarily have a particular schedule to be on a shared service. So we're looking to cover all the bases, if you like, with the framework. It's a challenge, and it's part of the work we're doing at the moment to further the design. But that is the key. So if you're in the shared service, there should be a solution. If you're outside of the shared service, there should be a solution on the framework as well. It's important to note that at the moment, there is no obligation for suppliers to submit invoices electronically as a consequence of complying with this directive. That's something I think we're looking to for both the public sector to gain some maturity in terms of getting used to electronic invoice processing and the changes from paper-based process to electronic processes. But it also means there's not a burden, if you like, on SMEs and suppliers to have to make an investment at e-invoicing at this point in time, unless they genuinely can see a business case for it. Now, the directive itself, it does state that this obligation really only applies to invoices that relate to contracts which are above EU thresholds. However, in terms of where a public body, particularly the shared services, are implementing an e-invoicing solution, we're recommending that it covers both above and below EU threshold invoices because of I suppose, the potential to reap benefits from e-invoicing, I think, as we've heard, is really driven by volumes. And there's an administrative burden associated with trying to decide, is this invoice related to this contract, whatever. So I think it's in everybody's best interest if we look to maximize the volume of invoices going through the invoicing solutions. But with consideration, I suppose, where there's a business case for that. Now, in terms of the solutions themselves, we're very much focusing on standards-based solutions. And the two elements of that are at the heart of it are, one is the European standard, which we've been given some great information on in the last few hours. The other key aspect of it is this PEPL that we've been talking about. I know some people are very familiar with it. We've probably heard either eInvoicing Ireland talk about it or have perhaps engaged with PEPL in terms of solutions themselves already. But it's basically, PEPL stands for Pan-European Public Procurement Online. And it's a set of standards, and it's an e-delivery network which combine to facilitate the exchange of procurement-related documents electronically in a standardized, interoperable way. I'll come back to that in more detail now in a moment. But at a high level then, from a national approach, what we're looking to do is for each sector to establish PEPL access points, or access to the PEPL network is probably an easier way of saying it, to their sectors, so that suppliers, should they wish to engage or submit your electronic invoices compliant with the European standard, all they have to do is connect to the PEPL network once, and they have the ability through that connection to reach any public body in any of the sectors. And the suppliers at the top of that diagram, because I suppose the whole concept of PEPL really is about maximizing the interoperability and maximizing the investment you make in an e-invoicing solution. So whereas there are many other mechanisms to exchange electronic invoices, they usually require one party or the other to change something on their side to connect to another. So if it's a supplier portal, there might be a supplier portal in health. That's great, the supplier connects there, but there's a different one in education, or there's a different one in the public body A to B. This looks to just get one common way to submit an invoice to the public sector. The standard is already set out for us. We have what the format, what the data in it should be. PEPL helps us even shape that further. And then the PEPL also provides, I suppose, as Martin and Christian had said, the infrastructure, the roadwork to channel those invoices in and out of the public sector. So just to touch on PEPL a little bit lower level, we've talked about this four-corner model earlier this morning. And really what it is to connect to the PEPL, well, the PEPL network itself, it's referred to as an e-delivery, an electronic delivery network. It is effectively a a collection of what's called access points. So it's a little bit akin to, I suppose, a mobile network, a mobile telecoms network. So you might have a telecoms operator A, B, C. You buy your handset, you're with telecoms company A. You don't necessarily need to know what the person you're calling's network is. The network providers talk to each other in the same language. They provide the network, they communicate using the same protocol, the data is exchanged in common formats. And that's really what PEPPOL brings. It's the access points talk to each other using the same communications protocol, and they're exchanging the information using this PEPPOL standard, which, if you like, encompasses the European standard. So for a public body or a contracting authority to connect to the PEPPOL network, it involves engaging the services of a PEPPOL access point service provider. It is possible to establish your own access points in-house, and some parties may do that. Some service providers or suppliers may do it themselves if they're large enough. But in general, it's a service provided by a particular group of service providers. The supplier was free to choose their own service provider. Again, the key is that they have a connection to the PEPPOL network. Their service provider and how they interact with their service provider is effectively their business. So in the slide there, the supplier is talking to an access point provider. That could well be the supplier is logging on to a web portal, is typing in their invoice, and the service provider providing the access point converts that to the European standard and submits it through to the access point for the contracting authority. Again, the contracting authority is connected to an access point. That could be a very direct connection to a high-end ERP system, perhaps like in the case of the FMSS, they're looking for automated interface through. Or again, it could be a case that it's just the received invoice is presented online through a portal and it's available to view. It's available perhaps to download as a PDF or automatically emailed through to the public body. So I suppose the interaction between the contracting body or their user, if you like, and their service provider is really, it's flexible, and it's up to each public body or solution that we're looking at to specify their requirements in that regard. But it gives us the flexibility to say to the suppliers as well, you're free to choose what solution works best for you. It can be, and financially that can be on different scales altogether. The other aspect, I suppose, it's trying to highlight there is that once it connects, again, once the supplier has a connection or the public body, you're connected to every other access point on that, on the network. And that's a growing community when you look at Europe as well. So if you're a supplier and you're doing business with public sector in Ireland, but perhaps you're also dealing with the NHS in the UK, they're PEPPOL enabled as well. So you, using your same connection there, you can submit your electronic invoice through and it should be accepted. And with all the member states that Martin flagged there that are looking to adopt PEPPOL, that broadens the community and the network we can reach. So in terms of eInvoicing Ireland, our main programme activities, there's two key work streams that are our focus at the moment. One is communications, and this is part of it, trying to raise awareness about the directive, the obligations, the timelines. We want to build up your understanding of perhaps what it means to the invoice processing functions in your own public body and how best maybe to start preparing and planning for that. And Maura is going to talk a little bit more about that in the wrap-up at the end. But the other key deliverable then is a framework for the procurement of e-invoicing solutions. So we, again, through our working with our sector partners and the other members of steering and the collaboration and consulting we've done with the various groups that have a stake in all of this, we're developing a framework, we're developing specifications for solutions, and it's expected to be available in Q4 of this year. And it should address, I suppose, if you're I'll move on forward. If you're a shared services, we're expecting that solutions will be available on that framework for health business services, for the financial shared services and central government, and the ETB e-invoicing. And I know the flavour of requirements there will be different. The likes of the ETB may well be already compliant, and I know, so that we'll hear a bit more about that from Michael in a few moments. In terms of local government, we're working with the LGMA, and we expect that there will be a solution available on the framework for them to consider, and which would facilitate, or I suppose, and enable the local authorities comply with the directive and look to achieve benefits beyond compliance. So the broader benefits of e-invoicing, should that be appropriate for their specific requirements. And then we've got the others, if you like, so individual public bodies or groups of them, where it's not covered by the existing shared services models and local, say, local authority or coordinated bodies. So we're looking to establish a set of solutions on a framework that will provide perhaps basic compliance solutions, where a public body, it may have low volume of invoices, so it may not necessarily have a great business case for establishing an e-invoicing solution, but it still may have a requirement under the directive to establish a channel to support the standard. It could be a public body that is in transition to a shared service, perhaps not due to transition over in April next year, maybe September or the year later. Is it worth investing in an e-invoicing solution of any, I suppose, with straight-through processing capabilities? Perhaps not. So we'll be looking for the framework to provide solutions to those kind of public bodies that will give them an option to receive an invoice that's compliant with the European standard, but perhaps not have the full automated back office interfacing capabilities that the more shared services solution will have. However, there will be public bodies, again, that do have a substantial e-invoicing requirement. You know, if your significant volumes, many public bodies are already looking at e-invoicing solutions, irrespective of the directive, in a way to sort of increase efficiencies within their accounts payable departments and manage the volumes that are coming through. So for that, we would look for the framework to have additional services where it's got the capability, providers have the capability to transform from one data format to another, perhaps carry out some validation on the invoices that are received, and provide some interfacing services that help the public body automatically load or move the invoice electronically into their back office system. So that's the broad spectrum, I suppose, we're trying to service through the framework. It's in progress at the moment. We're expecting it to be available in the fourth quarter of this year. I would encourage you to keep an eye on our website, on the OGP website. We'll keep that updated with developments as the program's moving forward. But also as we, you know, as things become apparent to us, information from the market, from the various groups, CEF resources, we'll try and publish them as much as possible on this site to help keep you informed. So that's me. Thank you very much.